I'm Callum, 34, and I just saw my whole life fall apart in front of me. After 6 years of marriage and nearly 8 years of dating, I believed that my wife, Valerie, 32, and I had a strong, if not ideal, relationship. However, I suppose that delusion disintegrated more quickly than I could have predicted. In retrospect, I see that the warning flags were there, minor, nearly unnoticeable adjustments that, at the time, appeared to be the normal course of a committed partnership. Valerie began arriving home from work later than usual, but I dismissed it because she had a tough marketing job. I didn't investigate it too much, but she changed the password on her phone, saying she needed greater protection because her work emails were sensitive. We had always had faith in one another. I brought up the password issue in passing the first time. Earlier that day, I had attempted to check the weather on her phone while we were having supper. I laughed a little and added, "Hey, I couldn't check the weather on your phone. It's locked now." We started using passwords. When? Her fork was frozen in midair as she hardly raised her head from her plate. "All I wanted was some privacy," she said calmly. "Is that an issue? My privacy?" In an attempt to lighten the tone, I laughed. I thought she would laugh it off and respond with a light-hearted remark, but she didn't. Rather, her face became stern. She yelled, "Callum, you're being domineering. Is there something I can't have all to myself?" That ought to have been the first serious warning sign, the first indication that something was wrong, that we had changed. However, I didn't want to accept it. I didn't want to believe that the woman with whom I had formed a life was keeping something from me. I decided to let it go. Then the spending began. Expensive meals, brand new clothing from expensive stores, and midday salon visits. All of these expenses began to appear in our joint account. She dismissed my question concerning them. She used to refer to them as client meetings. As you are aware, networking is a component of my work. Yes, but going to the salon during the workday? I softly pushed. Angrily, she rolled her eyes. "God, I work hard, Callum. I'm worthy of treating myself occasionally. Do I now need your permission?" You couldn't have a real talk without it turning into a brawl. Every worry I expressed was received with hostility and charges that I was choking her. Like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point, the tension between us continued to increase. When she changed gyms, that was the actual turning point. Going to the same one was a regular part of our routine and something we did together. Suddenly, though, she acquired a new membership at a fancy gym on the other side of town. She began going either late at night when she was worn out from the day or early in the morning before work. She had already had a shower, had her hair done, and was dressed in clothes I had never seen her in before when she got home. One evening, when she entered the room wearing a fitting top and elegant black leggings that appeared to have cost more than our entire gym membership, I said, "That's not your usual gym gear." She gave me a glare that could have cut me. "Are you really observing what I'm wearing right now?" "That's not it," I answered in a tight tone. "It simply seems like. It's as if you don't want me to realize that you're changing." Her face became even more stern. "Perhaps I simply don't want to feel like I have to tell you about everything I do. Have you ever considered that?" Every discussion turned into a minefield. Every worry turned into proof of my alleged neediness and insecurity. I began to ponder whether I was being unreasonable and began to question myself. Did I overreact? Was it my imagination? Or was there something else? And then everything fell apart last week. Her phone buzzed on the counter while I was repairing a leaking pipe beneath the kitchen sink. I looked at it out of habit rather than interest. My heart fell when the message preview showed. Jake was the sender. "Can't wait for tonight, baby. He still has no clue." Jake, her former partner. The Jake who used to make almost flirty remarks on her Instagram. The one she swore meant nothing. Was the one she insisted was only a good friend. As I set the wrench down, my hands shook. I briefly convinced myself that there must be a reason that perhaps it wasn't Jake, that there was a miscommunication. But I knew better in my heart. I bided my time till she returned home. Every minute seemed to drag on forever, with the sound of the clock ticking away louder and louder. She looked like she had just stepped off a magazine cover when she eventually entered the room at 9 p.m. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was beautiful, and she was wearing a black dress that I had never seen before. The message was still there on the screen as I stood there, paralyzed, holding her phone. "Who is Jake referring to?" I asked in a steady voice that showed no signs of the storm inside of me. She looked at me, then at the TV. Then she laughed, a scathing, icy, callous chuckle. She grinned and said, "Well, I guess you're not as stupid as I assumed." With my mind spinning and my chest constricted, I gazed at her. "Not even going to deny it, are you?" Arms crossed, she flung her purse onto the couch. "Why would I? Eventually you had to find out. I am currently with Jake. He is in control of his life. What are you doing? Repairing leaks and dreaming of launching your own company?" I'm not even sure who I was staring at. I had made a life with this woman, but she was not the same person I had loved. She was a stranger, nasty, cold, and aloof. "So what? You're simply shoving it in my face after cheating on me for months?" She let out a frustrated groan. "Let's not drag this out, Callum. A better future is in store for me. You were really preventing me from moving forward." My entire world fell apart in an instant. The next few hours were a muddle, a nightmare like haze that I was unable to get rid of. Without a second look, Valerie simply walked away after dropping her nasty bombshell, making her way straight to our bedroom. Her phone was still in my hand while I stood there, my fingers getting tighter till my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing with inquiries, a clamor of perplexity and treachery. That night, I didn't get any sleep. I was unable to. I recreated every moment of our marriage and every decision that led us to this point, while I lay on the couch and gazed at the black ceiling. Had I overlooked anything so clear? Was I truly so oblivious? She pretended nothing had happened the following morning. She gave me a cold, condescending morning as she passed me, treating me like a roommate she could not stand. I observed her brewing coffee, her manner incredibly nonchalant. "Is that it?" After a restless night, I eventually choked out, my voice scratchy. "You only have that to say?" She didn't flinch at all. "Callum, what do you want me to say? An expression of regret? Would you feel better after that? Perhaps the first shot back, or at least a little truthfulness. Something that gives me hope that my final 8 years of life weren't wasted." She let out a frustrated sigh, as if I were a burden she had to bear. "See, it's finished, all right. I am currently with Jake. I've moved on. You ought to as well," went on, as if it were that simple. As if our marriage and our whole life together were a passing phase that she could end without facing any repercussions. She then vanished from the house like a ghost. Her time was divided between work and gym sessions, which lasted suspiciously late into the night, and she avoided me by arriving home later and later. She was with him, and I knew it. She didn't need to express it. I could tell everything by the smug, almost pleased look she had on her face when she saw me on the couch. The days were hazy. Anger, despair, and a burning need to understand clashed in my head. I began investigating everything. We had exhausted our bank accounts. For months, her spending had been unrestrained, with funds going toward opulent dinners, weekend getaways, and shopping excursions. I looked at our home security cameras, which she had forgotten were there. After sifting through hours of video, I discovered Jake picking her up in our driveway in his fancy, well-maintained vehicle. She was laughing like a teenager as she slipped out the front door. While I was at work, I broke my back watching them drive away together so she could live a comfortable life. I was ill and embarrassed. Horrible. Then Alicia, Valerie's sister, unexpectedly arrived. Alicia was witty, bright, and had always treated me like a brother, which is why I had always liked her. However, I realized she wasn't here as an ally when she stood in our living room with her arms crossed and that smug smile on her face. Val told me everything. She started in a condescending tone. Callum, it's time to let go. She is worthy of better. You can't give her what Jake can. Even I was astonished by the hollow, bitter sound of my laughter. What? A more convenient lie and a more expensive car. Her civility mask came off as her face contorted. A genuine man with a genuine future. Give up holding onto a marriage that is already over. Simply sign the documents and proceed. All you're doing is making yourself appear more pitiful. The documents, divorce documents. A nasty afterthought to her admission. They had been left on the dining room table the day after I learned about it. My stomach turned at the idea of leaving up the house I had worked so hard to create and the life I had dedicated myself to. However, I cooperated. I gave them the impression that they had triumphed and that I was a defeated loser who would simply disappear. I muttered, pretending to be resigned. All right, I'll sign them. With a triumphant look, Alicia walked away without saying anything more. I felt a glimmer of rebellion as I stood there looking at the pile of legal papers that would separate our life. They believed they had triumphed. They believed I was too damaged to defend myself. However, they were unaware of me. Not at all. I had a meeting with a lawyer the following day. I informed him about the manipulation, the money, and the infidelity. I wasn't going to be a pawn in her perverse scheme, so I began collecting proof, including bank records, copies of her communications, our camera's footage, and receipts for the extravagant costs she claimed were for client meetings. I refused to allow her and Jake to leave unharmed while I picked up the fragments of their destroyed lives. I began recording everything. I documented every conversation, every insult, and every effort she made to deceive me into thinking I was solely to blame. Behind the scenes, I was constructing my case while portraying the defeated ex and the broken spouse. I came to the realization that I wasn't merely battling for what I had lost when I managed to pull myself out of the heartbreak fog. They attempted to take away my dignity and self-respect, and I was battling to get it back. This was not the end of it. By no means. The ensuing weeks were a masterclass in planning, duplicity, and manipulation. I needed to be strategic, perceptive, and patient. Jake and Valerie believed that I was a shell of the person I used to be, broken and defeated. They didn't know. My brother's family friend, my lawyer, was a sharpshooter who understood the law and knew how to use it. He suggested that I continue gathering evidence in secret. Just straightforward documentation, no arguments or emotional outbursts. I started gathering truths. Every time she arrived home late, every time our joint account showed an odd charge, and every time I saw her with Jake on video, it all went into my expanding collection. I buried myself in projects at work, staying late to keep myself busy rather than because I had to. The office turned into a haven where I could concentrate and not be reminded of her treachery all the time. My coworkers saw the change, the black circles beneath my eyes that had taken up residence, the tiredness in my cheeks. Some of them inquired about my well-being, but I dismissed it, attributing it to stress. How could I respond? My 8-year wife is cheating on her ex, and I'm recording it like a depressed detective? Then the pivotal moment arrived. I saw it when going over the bank statements, a sizable $20,000 withdrawal from our savings account. It was a sudden, intentional impact rather than a slow drain. I felt panic initially, then anger. That evening, I questioned Valerie about it. Her laptop was open as though she intended to work while seated at the dining table. What on earth is this? I slammed the printed statement down in front of her and demanded. She gave it a quick glance, her face composed, almost bored. It's the payback of a loan. Remember how I borrowed it for some planned renovations? Remodels? The first sneered. We had no plans to renovate. In fact, where did it go? Her eyes became stony. Don't question me, Callum. I had costs that you wouldn't comprehend. Then, it struck me. The pricey dinners, the new clothes, and the extravagant excursions. She was still living in mine, but she was making money for her new life with Jake. I emailed Valerie's parents that evening. They had accepted me, helped me through difficult times, and treated me like family. I had always loved them as if they were my own. The truth was due to them. I've included screenshots of her and Jake leaving our house together, bank records, and text messages. It wasn't necessary for me to embellish. The evidence was self-evident. They called me the following morning. Her father was incensed, and her mother was devastated. I discovered that Valerie had borrowed an additional $20,000 from them just weeks prior, purportedly for home upgrades. But they were unaware that she had stolen money from them, saying it was for our future. I was devastated by the shame and remorse in her mother's voice. I had mountains of evidence by now. My lawyer examined everything, squinting as he put everything together. He recommended that I give her a bit more time to dig herself deeper. As they planned their future on my dime, I waited and bided my time. Jake's career was beginning to fall apart in the meantime. I found out from a mutual acquaintance that his company had been losing customers as a result of internal gossip and unethical behavior damaging his brand. He had ruined my marriage for a feeling of stability and authority that was already slipping through his fingers, and I couldn't help but snicker at the irony. When Valerie and Alicia appeared together, arrogant and self-satisfied, to finalize the terms of the divorce, it was the last straw. They entered my house as though it were a new territory. Their faces were lined with a sort of haughty satisfaction as they sat at the dinner table, confident and patronizing. Valerie began, "Callum, this is for the best," in a tone reminiscent of a father reprimanding a child. "Let's all move on. Just sign the papers." I sat back and observed them, allowing the quiet to linger. I then moved a folder across the table, containing all of the proof I had gathered, printed, arranged, and proven. The first to falter was Alicia's smirk. Valerie's face blanched, and her eyes became wide as she turned the pages, taking in the pictures, the texts, the withdrawals, and the video. "What? What is this?" she stumbled. "This is everything," I stated coolly. "Every dime you took, every betrayal, every lie. I'm bringing this before the court." In real time, their confidence was broken. Valerie's voice cracked as she wavered between anger and despair. Alicia made a vain attempt to reclaim control by making accusations and insults. Valerie's eyes were wild as she snarled, "This isn't over." "Oh, it is," I said, getting to my feet and speaking in a calm, icy tone. "For you, it's over. I will no longer serve as your pawn." In a frenzy of shock and panic, they departed. I was relieved of a burden I was unaware I was carrying as the door shut behind them. Not only was my marriage coming to an end, but so was the grip they believed they had on me. After that altercation, Valerie's and Jake's situation began to fall apart more quickly than I could have predicted. One exposed falsehood tripped over another until their entire facade collapsed, resembling a chain reaction. I was aware that Valerie would attempt damage control. When I handed her the proof, I could see the desperation in her eyes. The boldness of it all, however, caught me off guard. She continued to think that she could steer the story, that she could avoid the repercussions by using her charm and cunning. She returned to the house with wild and fiery eyes. The day following our confrontation, I was already ready for the repercussions, sitting on the couch in the living room and drinking coffee. Her voice was cracking at the edges as she shouted, "What the hell did you do?" I cautiously put the mug down and took a slow sip. What do you mean, Val? She spat. My parents called me, her voice trembling. They know everything. They're threatening to cut me off if I don't fix this. You had no right. No right, I said with a loud, brittle laugh. No right to tell them what you've been doing? What did you steal from them? From me? I had every right. Valerie, you wanted this. You got it. Her fists were clenched as she stood there, panting. I briefly feared that she would strike me, but instead, she pivoted on her heel and began to curse. She didn't return to our house after that. However, Jake's demise was a distinct kind of show. I was informed by a friend of a friend that Jake's employer had begun looking into his behavior. Copies of messages, images, and recordings of him talking about illegal business practices, underhanded transactions, stealing clients, and bribing contractors had been forwarded to them. I had a pretty solid notion, but I wasn't sure who had told them. His reputation quickly began to deteriorate. Fast-moving rumors caused partners to reevaluate their partnerships, co-workers to separate themselves, and clients to start withdrawing. He was suspended while a thorough inquiry was conducted. I was informed. The stability Valerie had thrown me for, all the success he displayed, was a house of cards that was toppling in real time. Next up came Alicia. The arrogant sister who enjoyed watching me wriggle was the enabler. She made an effort to connect, initially sending condescending texts and later making direct requests. I chose to ignore them all until she arrived at my office one day, looking as confident as ever. When she saw me, she screamed, "You think you're so clever." Anger and desperation were mixed together on her face. "Dragging everyone down with you. That's real mature, Callum." I folded my arms and leaned back. Dragging everyone down? Or holding you accountable? You're pathetic. All of this, you're just bitter, she said, her face flushed, and she gave me a fierce look. Maybe, I quietly said, but at least I'm not a liar or a thief. I had lost everything. They had attempted to take away my stability, my marriage, and my tranquility. However, they underestimated me. They didn't realize how patient and silent a man with nothing to lose might be. Valerie's attorney contacted her a week later. This time, the divorce process started in a different way, and I had a ton of leverage. My attorney methodically laid out the facts, including the fabricated stories, the stolen money, and the infidelity. We prevailed in our battle for a favorable settlement. I retained my investments, the property, and some of the money she had spent. I had not felt so free in years until the day the divorce was finalized. At last, the burden of her treachery, of all the dishonesty and heartache, began to lessen. I was no longer the husband holding onto a ghostly marriage. Once more, I was just Callum, bruised but unbroken. The fallout between Valerie and Jake was more widely known. Jake was fired after being suspended. When I last heard from him, he was battling legal concerns from former clients and sour business partners, and his reputation had been completely destroyed. Valerie was left clinging to the remnants of her affair, a betrayed relationship that was now in shambles. Most of their mutual friends had deserted them. People were able to see through the manipulations and lies. They were alone and vulnerable, their flawless facade gone. It took me a while to recover, but it was mine. I remodeled the house, purging it of all Valerie-related memories and poisoned moments. I got back in touch with pals I had lost touch with, folks who helped me remember who I was before everything. I even began thinking about pursuing new professional goals that I had put on hold while I was married. The years I lost to someone who never appreciated me, and the betrayal still sting when I think back on it. However, there was an odd sense of calm knowing that I had retaliated and prevented them from winning. That I had reclaimed my life, fragment by fragment. The rubble of Valerie and Jake's mayhem kept spreading for months. News of their scandal had spread both inside and outside of our social groups. The A warning was now being spoken behind their backs about what had once been a meticulously crafted facade of ambition and achievement. I had heard that Valerie was having difficulties. She was left stranded after Jake's career collapse. The very people who had promised her a bright future his connections had turned to ash. Their opulent lifestyle came tumbling down with his termination and the court cases involving former clients. They were essentially living out of suitcases, had defaulted on a rental condo, and had sold Jake's pricey car. Valerie made an effort to reconcile with her parents, but trust is difficult to rebuild. Not after they discovered she had defrauded and deceived them. Jake tried to get in touch with me, cornered and desperate. A pitiful effort to talk things out while drinking. As soon as his number appeared on my screen, I blocked it. It was ridiculous how bold it was of me to even consider giving him my attention. But Valerie wasn't finished. She attempted to contact me by way of our mutual friends, claiming to have been duped by Jake, that he had used her, misled her, and made every other possible justification. None of it was something I considered. She made her decisions that were irrevocable and destroyed lives. I happened to run across Alicia one day. Her swagger was gone, and in its place was a hollow, suspicious expression. Her social status had completely collapsed. She used to manipulate her pals with lies and rumors, but now they shun her. She made a feeble attempt at an apology cloaked in justifications when she sought to talk to me. I gave her my full attention. I'd been drowned in their poison long enough. Life started to take shape once more for me. The house's refurbishment felt like a kind of rebirth. It seemed like a piece of me was restored with every room reconfigured and every wall painted over. I launched my own company, something I had always wanted to do but lacked the guts to do while I was in that poisonous marriage. Although it wasn't simple, it was mine. It was also flourishing. I eventually met someone. Rachel is her name. It was a friend of a friend's scenario when we met at a local charity function. She was real and grounded, and she carried her past without allowing it to define who she was. We didn't rush or have any expectations. We took our time. I felt, for the first time in a long time, that I was with someone who accepted me for who I was, not something they could change. Rachel and I happened to be in the same coffee shop, Valerie, and I used to go to one afternoon. It wasn't until I saw Valerie in line, her hair tied back in an untidy bun, her eyes sunken and exhausted, that I even understood the link. She noticed Rachel's hand resting on mine and me laughing. We looked at each other for a moment. The weight of what she had lost was all that was visible on her face, no arrogance, no smug smirk. She didn't come over. The realization of her own decisions looked back at her, and she simply gazed as if she had seen a ghost. I felt nothing when she eventually turned away and walked away. I just felt finality, not retaliation or satisfaction. The last I heard, Jake had left the state, leaving burned bridges in his wake. Rumor had it that he was changing jobs since he couldn't stay in one place. Despite Valerie's best efforts to repair and reintegrate into our former circles, her reputation was irreparably damaged. People were aware. People did not forget. I eventually found serenity, but it took some time. I constructed instead of merely surviving their betrayal. I regained my sense of self-worth piece by piece, error by error. I discovered that true love isn't a power struggle or a business deal. It's honest, vulnerable, and flawed, but it's genuine. I no longer despise Valerie. I don't despise Alicia or Jake. I'm glad I learned those things, even though I wish I hadn't had to, because I now understand the importance of loyalty, honesty, and the fortitude required to leave when things are at their worst. My story finishes here, not with retaliation but with fortitude. I'm at last living for me, defined by the strength it required to heal them rather than the wounds they left behind.